is Dick Spencer, and today is March 11th, Sunday, and I'm interviewing my mother, Dorothy Pauline Van Dyke Spencer, at her home at 2904 North 51st Street in Lincoln, Nebraska. What were your folks' names?
My father's name was Lambert V. Van Dyke, and my mother's name was Jenny Naoma Ball Van Dyke.
And where did they come from originally?
Mama was born in Lincoln, Illinois, and my father was born in Pennsylvania, and I don't know the name of the town, but it was in Pennsylvania someplace.
And do you remember when they got married?
Yes, they were married June 11th, 1903.
About?
In LaSalle, Illinois. They were married at the home of my mother's sister in LaSalle, Illinois.
Where did they meet?
You mean my father and mother?
Yeah, before they were married.
Well, that I can't tell you. I don't know where they met.
Where were they living then when they were married?
They were living in Beatrice, I think, because my dad was a druggist, and he had a drugstore in Hebron, and that's where I was born. They lived in Hebron right after they were married.
How long did they lived there?
Not very long. I was just a baby when they moved from Hebron to Octavia, Nebraska, onto a farm.
Were Grandpa's, your dad's, folks farmers, or what did they do? Do you remember?
My father's folks were farmers, yes. They didn't, I don't think they had a very big farm. That was back in Pennsylvania. But they were farmers. They had a big family. My father was the youngest of 15 children.
And then, did you ever see your grandparents?
Yes, I saw my grandfather. My grandmother, my father's mother, died when he was 21, and I never did see her. But I can remember Grandpa coming out to visit us when I was about 8 or 10 years old. I can remember him.
And where did he come from? Do you remember?
Well, at that time, I think they lived in Indiana. He lived in Indiana. I think he lived with another son, or in the same vicinity where this son lived in Indiana.
And what about your mother's family? What did they do before?
My grandfather, Ball, my mother's father, was a bookkeeper in Beatrice, Nebraska. They lived in Beatrice. And he was a bookkeeper.
Who for, you remember?
No, I don't remember who for. There were 5 children. Grandpa had 5 children. My mother's mother died when she was 7. And Grandpa married again, and he had 5 children by his first wife, and then he married again, and he had 2 more by his second wife, who would be my mother's stepmother.
What was his name? Do you remember?
You mean Grandpa?
Your grandpa.
Yeah. John Ball.
Is that who the picture was that Grandma used to have on her wall?
Yes, yes, it is.
Was that her mother and father?
Yeah, it was her mother and father, yes.
Those pictures are gone.
Yeah, my sister got the pictures. I think Jean's got the
Jean
pictures.
has them
Yes,
still.
yes, I think she has them.
So when they were married, they lived in Hebron, and then where did they move from there?
To Octavia, Nebraska, and my dad went on to a farm, and they moved to several different farms around Octavia. I was about, let's see, where'd they go from there? I think Dad went back into the drugstore business. When I was 6, they moved to Beatrice, and that's where I started to school in Beatrice.
How did you get interested in drug business?
Well, yes, he had gone to what they called Highland Park College in Des Moines, Iowa, to get his pharmacist He had done that before he was married.
Didn't he used to, was that hanging on the wall?
Yes, do you remember that?
Kind of, yeah.
Wish I knew where that was
I
now.
wonder what happened to that.
Went the wayside, I'm afraid. Yes, he had gone to this pharmacy school in Des Moines and graduated from there, and that's how he got into the drug business. But he just never could make up his mind whether he wanted to be in a drugstore or whether he wanted to be on a farm. He finally ended up on a farm.
So then he started in Hebron as a druggist, and
yes.
then moved to Octavia as a farmer.
Yes, and we lived there until I was about, well, I must have been about 5 when they moved to Beatrice. And then he was in the Rexall drugstore in Beatrice for a year. Then they moved to Sterling, and he had a drugstore there.
Now, did he own those drugstores, or did he just work for somebody, do you remember?
He worked for somebody in Sterling. I think in Beatrice, I think he owned the store. But when they went to Sterling, he worked for this other druggist there.
What years would that have been, do you remember?
Well, let's see. I was about 6, so it would have been about 1910, 9 or 10, that they lived in Beatrice. Then they lived in, just 1 year they were in Beatrice. Then they moved to Sterling, and they were there 1 year. Because I was 8 years old, and from Sterling they moved to Greenfield, Iowa. And I was 8 years old when they moved out there.
And that's where they stayed.
And that's where they stayed, in Greenfield, around Greenfield.
Did they move to many different farms then around Greenfield?
Yes.
Or were they always in that one farm?
No, they moved several different times in Greenfield. They lived east of town, 2 miles east of town. That's where they moved when I was from Sterling, when I was 8. And they lived there about 3 years. Then they moved to what was called the Paxton Farm, which was west of town, 2 miles west of Greenfield. And they lived there for several years. I don't remember just how long. Then they moved to the Ben Rice Farm, which was east of Greenfield. And they lived there for 3 or 4 years. Then they moved up north of Greenfield. And by that time, they lived on the rice farm. I graduated from high school when they lived on the rice farm, so that must have been in 1923. And then they moved north of town. And I was gone from home then. But and they lived up there a little while, and then they bought what was called the Chi-Hawk Farm. They bought that farm east of town, and that's where they lived the rest of the time.
But the other places they just rented?
They just rented on a sharecrop basis, yeah, most of the time.
Why'd they go from Sterling back to Iowa, and how'd they end up in Greenfield? What was there in Greenfield that attracted them, and what was wrong with
what was wrong with Sterling? Well, the reason they moved back to the farm was because my father just thought that he'd rather be a farmer than be cooped up in a drugstore. When he as a youngster, he'd been raised on a farm, and he just didn't like to be in the drug business. So he finally decided to go back to the farm. And why they went to, I think probably the reason they went to Iowa is because Iowa was a pretty good agricultural state. And I think that probably they looked around to see, to investigate. And that's the only reason that I know can say why they went to Iowa, because they didn't know anybody out there. So I just think that they were looking for a good agricultural state to move to.
What about the schools in Greenfield that you can remember? What types of schools? Where were they located?
Well, when we first moved there, and I was just 8 years old, we went to a country school, and it was a mile away, and I mean a mile. It was up and over 6 hills, and that was a long walk.
And you walked?
And we walked when the weather was good, yes. We walked. There were neighbor children that went to the same school, and we all walked. It took us about a half hour to walk to school. So we walked when the weather was good. And I was in that school from the time I was 8 until I was ready for the 7th grade. Then when I went into the 7th grade, I went to town school. My dad, we had a buggy, a horse and buggy that my brother, Merle, and I both went to town school. And we drove the horse and buggy to town, and Dad would find a barn to rent, and we'd drive into town and have to unhitch the little horse that we drove. It was not really a pony, but it was bigger than it wasn't as big as a regular horse. It was just a small horse, and we'd have to unhitch and put it in the barn and go to school, and after school we'd have to hitch it up to the buggy and go home, which was about 2 miles from school.
Do you remember anything about those trips to school, about
Yes.
weather?
Yes, it was cold, and I remember one time going home, the buggy fell apart. I don't know what happened, can't remember what happened, but the buggy fell apart. And we had to go up to we were close to our neighbor's farmhouse, so we had to go up and call my dad, and he had to come down and put the buggy back together so we could go on home.
So you had phones even then?
Oh yeah, we had phones. Yeah.
When do you remember the first phone on the farm?
Well, let's see. It seems to me as though my folks always had a phone. They were country lines, and they didn't always work, and there were usually about 10 or 12 people on one line, and if somebody was talking, you had to wait till they got through before you could call. But I think we always had a phone. I think even when we moved out there, we had a telephone. When I was 8 years old, I'm sure there was a phone in the house there.
You took your lunch then to school?
Oh yes, we always carried our lunch, the little lunch pail. Yeah, never had any hot lunches at school.
So then, all the time you were in high school, you drove into town with Merle?
Yes, we went back and forth all the time when I was in high school. And
do you remember anything about school programs or anything you were in during that time?
Yes, I remember when I was in the grade school, before we even started high school, I was probably, I don't know, 4th or 5th grade. I can remember getting ready for programs, and we'd have them in the evening, and all the parents would come, and everybody'd have something to do. They'd either have a dialogue or maybe a short play and sing songs. Yes, I can remember. In particular, I remember one program was really interesting. I think I've got a picture yet. Yeah, among my pictures of all the kids that were in the program, all dressed up. And, we always had programs, and then can't remember too much about town programs. It seems to me as though we had programs in the country school more than we did in town. After I got in the town school, they'd have contests, declamatory contests, and musical programs, that type of thing. But in the country schools, of course, all the kids participated, from the big ones to the little ones, and it was kind of interesting.
At country school, what things do you remember about noon recess?
Well,
Games and things that you played. What type of games?
We played Blindsman Bluff. We played Kick the Can. And we played Pump Pump Pull Away.
How do you play that? I can't.
Well, we divide. I can't really remember, but we take sides, and then there'd be somebody between the two lines of players, and they'd say, "Pump Pump Pull Away, run away or I'll pull you away." And then we all had to run. And the person in the middle, if they could catch somebody, then that person had to be in the middle. And line up on the sides again. Everybody'd line up, and they'd go over it again. Pump, pump, pull away. Run away or I'll pull you away. And then if you didn't go, the person that was it would get a hold of you and pull. So you might as well run. And we used to take our lunch. We had about an acre of ground around the schoolhouse. It was a pretty nice little playground. And we'd take our lunch when it was hot and sit out back of the back of the schoolhouse in the shade and eat at noon.
Then you had a well there.
Yeah, no, we had to carry our water. We didn't have a well. There'd be two of us that would take the pail, and we had a stick that we'd put it on, and we'd go down to the neighbors and bring the water up. the hill for the school. Somebody had to do that every day. That was somebody's job.
What'd you do in the winter?
For water?
Yeah.
Well, I don't really remember that, but we probably melted snow. I don't exactly remember, but I do know we always had to carry our water. We didn't have a well there at school.
And where did your teacher come from? Did she live at the schoolhouse, or did she live around there?
She lived around there. If she didn't live close enough to go back and forth to town, she would room and board with some of the patrons of the school. Somebody that would live close she'd live at their place.
Do you remember about any schoolhouses being built or anything? Did the people in the community build them, or were they always just there?
They always were there. I don't know how they got there. I suppose originally they were built, but they were always, when I went to school around there, they were always right there.
Did they have a band when you got into town school? Did they have any music program with instruments?
Yes. Yeah, they had musical programs. I never played an instrument at all, so I wasn't in on any of that. But yes, they had music programs in the school.
Did they do much with athletics then, or different towns play each other in football and basketball?
I played basketball. And of course we didn't compete with other towns, but we had our own team, basketball. But we had football.
Boys football.
Boys football competed, We had a pretty good football team while I was in high school. But you'd go to the games and there was no seats. You went to the game and you stood up during the game.
Oh, you did?
Oh, yeah.
Both football and basketball, or?
I can't remember basketball. To my knowledge, I don't think we had a boys basketball team as such. But the thing I can remember is the football games. So we had to stand up along the sidelines. There weren't any seats to sit on.
Did the band play the football games?
No, we didn't have any music. All we had was cheerleaders.
What do you remember about Greenfield, the town, from when you first moved there? What do you remember about Greenfield, the town, from when you first moved there?
Well, Greenfield was just a small country town, and it was built around a square. It was the county seat. The courthouse was in the center, and then the buildings, the stores were built in a square right around the courthouse. And it was just a very small town. I think when we moved there, I think it was only about 12 or 1,500. But it did grow to, I think, around 1,800, maybe a little bit more now. But
how big is it? Still not too big, is it?
It's not, no. And it's gone down quite badly. They aren't keeping Greenfield up. The stores are getting pretty ratty looking, some of them.
What were some of the stores you remember when you were a kid there? The names of some of them?
Well, let's see. There was Murdy Drugstore. That was where we had drugs of all kinds. Then there was, let's see, can I remember the names of some of the others? There was, I can't, Crook Clothing Company, yeah. Crook had a clothing store. There was, I can't remember the names of the grocery stores. There were a couple grocery stores. There was a lumber yard, and I just can't remember the name.
I remember one grocery store. I think it was kind of on a corner.
Yeah. What was the name of it?
I can't remember, but I remember when I was over there in the 40s. I remember that store. Maybe it was different when you were a kid. And it seemed like there was a doctor's office just down in that same block, because I think I remember going to the grocery store and then one of your folks going to the doctor's office for something.
Yeah.
And I can't really remember the name of it, but I kind of remember it had a screen door on it. So, let's see, what else was I going to ask you about the town? Do you remember any? Oh, was that a county seat?
Yes, Greenfield was the county seat of Adair County.
And then they had fairs there.
Oh yeah, we had a pretty nice fairground there. They had a pretty nice county fair.
What do you remember about the early fairs?
Well,
Did you ever take things to the fair?
yes. My mother took some things once. I can't remember whether she ever won anything or not, but she used to take things to the fair. And they had a pretty nice fair. It was one of the highlights of the year, the fair.
Did they have rides
They had,
then, too?
yeah, and they had races. I can remember that. They had horse races. And I can remember a husband of a friend of the family's used to drive in this race. And they had these little two-wheel carts. What do they call those?
Yeah.
I can't remember. There's
What
a
do
name
they call
for them.
that?
I can't remember what they call that. But I can remember that he used to drive in this race, and he had a wreck once. That was quite a deal. He ran into the fence or something. Now, they had races, and they had lots of livestock because, of course, farmers around there had raised cattle, and it was a pretty good fair.
What kind of rides and things?
Merry-go-round mostly. They didn't have rides then like they do now. The merry-go-round is the only thing I can really remember. I think they had anything else. Another thing I can remember about the town when I was younger was the chautauquas that used to come in the summertime.
Oh, yeah.
They'd set up this great big chautauqua tent in the city park, and it was really nice. They'd have real good programs.
Now, where was the city park?
Well,
that wasn't on the square.
No, it was just a little ways off the square. It was about a block or two north and a block east of the square. It was just right there in town, but it wasn't right on the square. But that was quite a week because people really patronized the Chautauqua. I can remember they'd really have crowds. They'd sell season tickets to the families, and you could go every evening or pick out whatever you wanted to go to, and it was really interesting.
Do you remember what they cost?
No, I can't remember what the prices of tickets were.
What were some of the programs they had there?
Well, they had good bands. I can still remember this one band, and I don't remember the name of it, but they played, what's that? Sousa's March. Yeah, and that kind of stuff, and oh boy, that really sounded big time to me because we never heard anything like that. And then they'd have good speakers and sometimes the comedies, and they'd have dancers. I can remember a dance troupe that was there once. They had pretty good programs.
Well, were those religious, kind of, or not?
No, these weren't. I imagine, I can't remember for sure, but I think they probably had maybe a religious night or so. This lasted about 7 days. It'd be a 7-day-a-week affair. And they'd have programs in the afternoon, and then they'd have something different in the evening, but it wasn't all religious, no.
It's running now, so I guess we'll keep going. I guess we can hear it stop.
Yeah.
Let's see, what else do you remember about Greenfield? Anything particular?
Well,
about the town, or?
Let's see. I know that now they've built an addition to the schoolhouse that I was graduated from. They've got a nice school there, but going back, I can't think of anything.
What about church? Did you go into town to church all the time?
Yes, we did. We went to church all the time, that the weather was decent. And that meant, when you went to church, that meant that Dad had to hitch the horses to a buggy, a carriage, a two-seated carriage, and get all the kids dressed up and go to church. And my folks were quite religious, and we went all the time.
What church was it?
Methodist Church in Greenfield, and we went all the time. I can remember Mama taught a Sunday school class, and my dad sang in the choir. He had a good tenor voice, and he sang in the choir most all the time in my early days. And I remember one Sunday morning we started a church, and we were almost in town, and the horses got scared of something. I guess probably a car, because in those days there weren't that many cars on the road, and the horses didn't get to see the cars, and if they'd be on the highway and a car would come along, they'd get scared and turn around and run. And that's what they did that morning. They turned around and ran, and we landed in the ditch. Didn't turn over, but it scared the life out of everybody, I'll tell you. I still remember that.
Well, did the horses stop then?
Oh yeah, my dad finally got them stopped, yeah, but then not before. It was quite an experience.
So how many would ride there? Would be 5?
Well, let's see.
Kids?
2, 3. No, at that time there were just 3 of us in the family. Myself and Merle and Kenneth. Kenneth was a baby, because Kenneth was born in 1912 when we moved to Iowa. He was born that next spring, so it was 1912. It was there were just 3 of us at that time, and we went to church every Sunday that was nice, and we could. I remember one Easter. They were going to have a good Easter program that Sunday evening at church, and that was the Sunday that they had the terrible tornado in Omaha, and the sky got to looking so black and so bad that my folks wouldn't go to church, and I still remember how disappointed I was because we didn't get to go. And then the next day we heard, or maybe not the next day because we didn't even have radio then, but we heard that they'd had this terrible tornado in Omaha and so many people had gotten killed. So there was a good reason, I guess, why we shouldn't go to church that night.
Do you remember anything about the type of farms that you had? About cows or crops that you grew?
Yeah, my dad grew corn most of the time. Corn and oats. Some wheat, not very much, because that was not really a wheat country. But and he always had cattle. And
where'd they make their money on? What'd they make their money on? Selling corn mostly, you think, or?
Well, and pigs. He had pigs. They'd make it on a little of everything. We milked quite a few cows, and that's one of the things I had to do. I always helped milk when I was a kid. We'd sell the cream. They'd come around, the creamery had a truck that would come around and pick up your cans of cream, take it into the creamery. They'd sell cream, and then when the pigs were old enough and ready for market, they'd sell the pigs, and they'd make some money off of those. And not too much money off of cattle except to raise them for the milk.
You said you have an account book of your grandparents' farm, didn't you? Tell me that? Or something that told about?
Well, I've got that little diary that
told what they got for their eggs.
Told what? Yeah, there's some prices in there for eggs and oil and stuff like that.
How many? You were talking about milking cows. How many cows when you were milking? Do you remember you milked?
Oh, we milked from 6 to 8, maybe more than that, 9. It was a big job. I always had to milk by hand. Of course, we never had a milking machine.
And who went after the cows?
I had to go after the cows, and I hated that job. No end. I had to go about half a mile down into an old pasture after those cows, and oh, how I hated that.
Did you walk when you did that?
Yes, we walked. And sometimes my brother would go with me, but that was one of my jobs, was to go down and get the cattle.
Now, which farm was that on? Do you remember?
Well, that was the first farm that we lived on when we moved to Iowa. I can remember that. We lived there from the time I was 8 until I was about, maybe 10 or 12. And we always had to go after the cattle.
Do you remember anything about the barn? What kind of barn? Was it a wood barn?
A big old wooden barn, yeah, with stanchions on one side. We'd put the cattle in and put them in the milk, and there was a big, what do they call that, where you put the hay in front of them.
Yeah.
And feed them there, and there was a feed box on the side. Dad had put some grain in those feed boxes.
And then, did you use those T-shaped stools, milk stools?
Yeah, little milk stool.
Did they use kickers then, too?
Well, some of the cows were pretty gentle, if we had any kickers, well, Dad always milked those, and he had a cow or two that he'd have to put a rope around their legs, yes, to keep them from kicking when he'd milk them. But for the most part, if he'd get a cow that he couldn't handle very easily, he didn't usually keep it very long because there's too much monkeying around with him. He'd sell it, and
How do you sell them? Do you take them into...
take them to a sale, take them into the sale barn.
And how do you get them there then?
I don't remember that. I don't know whether they put them in a truck, I suppose, because I can remember the trucks coming out. Yeah, I think they've trucked them in. There'd be truckers. That's right. Now I remember there were truckers. There were people in town that did that. They'd come out with their truck, charge you so much for hauling there.
Well, when you sold the milk, then was it whole milk or did you separate it?
No, we separated it. We had a separator, and this things had a big bowl up on top, and you'd strain the milk into this big bowl, and then you had to turn the crank, and the milk would go down through this thing that had a bunch of discs in it, and they'd whirl real fast.
I remember this.
You remember that, I'm sure.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
sure you saw that when you were a kid.
Was that the same separator that they had when I was out on the farm too, or did they get a new one, do you think?
Well, I can't remember, but it would work the same way,
Yeah.
I'm sure. I don't know whether it would be the same one or not.
Do you remember if they ever had any, did they ever inspect your barns or your cattle? Or you just sold them?
No. You could fish the flies out of the milk, and there were plenty of flies to be fished out. And you'd strain the milk, and there'd be growth in the bottom of the strainer, and no wonder we ever grew up in those days, I'll tell you.
How'd you heat your house?
We had what they called a round oak stove. That was the name of the brand. It didn't have those celluloid things in the front of it that looked so pretty and rosy when you look through. Ours was just a plain round stove. And
What'd you burn in it? Wood or coal?
wood, some coal, mostly wood though, and cobs and that type of thing. We didn't use much coal. Well, I think maybe they had a little bit of coal, but very little. It was mostly cobs and wood and that kind of stuff.
And then did somebody keep that going?
No, the fire would go out. The fire would go out unless it would be a real cold night. The fire would go out, and sometimes if it was real cold, I think my dad used to get up in the middle of the night maybe and throw another stick of wood on it to keep it from being too cold in the house. But I can remember Mama used to try to have plants, and so many times before the winter's over, those plants would freeze right there in the window, in our living room, so you know how cold it would be in the house. And sometimes the water in the water pail would have ice in it in the morning.
My God.
So boy, I'll tell you, you had to be a hardy pioneer to live through those days.
And what'd you cook on then?
Well, she had a range in the kitchen.
And that was wood?
Yeah,
too?
yeah, it was wood or cob.
Did that have the water reservoir? and all
Yes,
that
had
on
a
it?
water reservoir on the side, and that was one of the kids' job, was to keep that reservoir full of water. You have to pump the water and bring it in, pour it in, and that's where you always had warm water when that thing was full. That's one thing, the water was always warm, because it was warm from the stove.
What else do you remember about gardening or other things you had on the farm?
Well, Mama always had a big garden. Yes, Mama always had a big garden. She'd get up early in the morning. She liked to go out early in the morning and work in the garden before it got hot. And we always had really a good garden. She'd raise all kinds of vegetables, and I remember one garden in particular. We had a great big asparagus bed all along the side of the garden, and she raised boysenberries one year, and she tried to raise strawberries, but that didn't turn out very well. Strawberries took too much time, I guess, or something. But she raised peas, and they'd always have a big potato patch and put in lots of potatoes. And then in the fall, or when it was time to harvest them, my dad would go through with a plow and turn the rows of potatoes over, and then us kids would have to go along and pick them up. And they had a cave where they'd store that stuff and put those potatoes downstairs. And
let's see, we were talking about the farm, storing stuff. What about Did that stuff keep all winter in the
Oh, yeah.
cave then?
Oh, yes.
Did you have any fruit trees too?
Yes. One farm that we lived on, the first one we moved to, when I was 8 years old, when we moved to Iowa, had 2 great big apple orchards on it. And they had just all kinds of apples. And I can remember in the fall, my dad, we'd pick up apples and put them in a wagon. And Dad found a place where he could make cider. And he'd take those apples and they'd make cider. And we used to have some real good cider, but they had lots of apples. But, yes, stuff would keep real well. The potatoes would keep until towards spring they'd begin to sprout, but then we had potatoes to use all winter. And Mama would can, and they'd keep the canned goods down in the basement too. There was, or in this cave, there were shelves built to hold the cans.
That was separate from the house?
Yes, yeah, it was.
What about meat? Did you slaughter your own animals sometimes?
Yes, and Mama would can meat. We'd can it in a pressure cooker, put it in jars, and can it in pressure cooker, and we had canned meat.
Do you remember how you canned it in the pressure cooker? Do you remember the operation?
Well, I can't.
I was just reading about canning meat the other day.
Were you? I can't really. Remember. I just really can't remember because I wasn't that old at that time, and I can't remember. I can remember as I got older helping Mama can chicken though. We used to can chicken in the fall. She always had lots of chickens, and that's another way that they had money, earned money was through their chickens. They'd have lots of eggs. And in the fall, Mama would cull her flock and take out the hens that she knew would not produce. And then we'd clean them and pack them in jars and put water and seasoning in and pressure cook those. And they made such good chicken salad and chicken and dumplings. It was really good.
The stuff kept pretty good? Nobody usually got sick on it?
No, we never ever got sick on anything. No. Of course, you have to, if you open it and you think it's not what it ought to be, you throw it away. Yeah. You can soon tell. But we never ever got sick on anything we canned. And Mama canned lots of stuff. She canned beans, and we used to can peas and corn and all that kind of stuff. We never got sick off of it. Tomatoes.
And then did you take your eggs to town and to sell them, or did they pick them up?
No, they take them into town and sell them. And part of the time, when Mama really went into the chicken, and really had a big flock of chickens, she used to grate her own eggs, and she would send to New York City all the nice big eggs, and she'd get a really good price for it. They'd pack them in these 44 dozen carton egg crates.
Is that those double wide ones?
The big double ones, yes. And she had a place in New York City where she would send those, and she got a real good price out of her eggs. She'd send the big ones there because she could get so much more for them she could at home.
Then how'd they ship those? By train, probably?
Yeah, that's the only way to ship in those days. Yeah. How they kept them good all that time, I don't know, but...
Probably didn't have... Well, they had ice cars.
Refrigerated cars, yeah. But she did that for quite a while and got pretty good money out of it. And otherwise, they just sell them there in town.
What'd you generally eat for breakfast and things?
Well, we had pancakes most of the time. Mama used to cook oatmeal. We'd have oatmeal. And then they used to send to Sears and Roebuck and buy groceries. That's when Sears used to sell groceries, too. They'd get a grocery catalog, and they'd sit down and make out an order for groceries and send to Sears. And they'd get dry cereal. I can remember Wheaties and Wheat Flakes. They didn't call them Wheaties. They called them Wheat Flakes and Corn Flakes.
Well, I thought that was something new.
No. We had Corn Flakes when I was a girl. Wheat Flakes and Corn Flakes, and then she'd cook oatmeal and that kind of stuff. And we had for breakfast pancakes a lot in the winter when it was cold.
Your dad was too old to go to the First World War, or he didn't go because he was on a farm? Did they think...
First World War?
Yeah.
No, he was too old. I don't think he ever even had to register.
Didn't he?
No. Because you see, let's see, he was born in 1878. And, well, I don't know. I don't even remember Dad ever having to register. So.
Do you remember anything about the war?
All I remember is there's a lot of talk about it. And I remember when they signed the armistice in 1918, Greenfield just went wild. I'll tell you, there was no school that day, and everybody was out hooping and hollering, and that's about all I remember about it, really.
See, I was in Greenfield during the Second World War when they
Yes, you were. That's right.
quit firing. I don't remember the occasions. They had a big parade then.
That's right.
That.
That's the summer that you went on by yourself over there on the bus.
Yeah.
We put you on here, and Kenneth met you in Omaha and put you on the bus for Greenfield, and you were 6 years old. And my dad went in to pick you up at the hotel where the bus stopped, and he couldn't find you. And some lady had taken you and bought you an ice cream cone.
Yeah, I remember that very, very clearly.
And I think I hope I still got that card that Mama wrote to me when you got there. And she
really?
said, yeah, and she said, I think he could have gone on to New York City all by himself.
Do you remember anything about the chickens? Where'd they get their little chickens? Did they hatch them from eggs?
No, Mama did hatch some, but when she went into the chicken business and really had a lot of chickens, she'd buy them from a hatchery. And they'd buy the little chickens when they were just, I don't know how many days old, but they were real small. And,
it seems like I can remember something about an incubator on the farm, a big high wood one that had doors that opened on the side.
Yes, that's when Mama...
Did that run on kerosene or what?
Yeah, kerosene lamps, yeah. She hatched her own chickens a lot of the time, but when she really went into it, then she bought them. But yes, she'd set that incubator, and I don't remember how many eggs that would hold at once. But they'd set that incubator, and then, of course, have to keep the light going and keep it at a certain temperature. There was a thermometer inside. It had to be at a certain temperature. They had to what they call roll eggs every day. She'd take these trays of eggs out. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And she'd take your hands and just run your hands over them carefully and roll them. Turn them.
Where did they keep that incubator? I can't remember.
Back in the bedroom. Back in one of those bedrooms.
Yeah.
It was back in one of those bedrooms.
And then they put them in those brooders.
Yeah, in the little brooder house.
Little brooder house.
And that was heated by a kerosene lamp, too.
They had kerosene up inside those things, didn't they? Did those ever catch on fire?
Ours never did. They had trouble with
that. I remember they always used
that.
to worry about that.
Yes, they did. But we never had a fire. My folks were awful careful of that kind of stuff. The only fire I ever remember, and it didn't amount to anything too much, was when a kerosene stove caught on fire once.
Was that
for some reason or other, yeah. I don't know what happened, but it didn't amount to much. But folks were always real careful about fires.
Well, let's see. Let me think a minute here. Do you remember anything your parents telling you about when they came to Nebraska, how they came, or about Indians or anything like that?
No, I can't. I can't remember that my folks ever said anything about Indians at all. And how they came to Nebraska, I would say probably by train, because I don't think my folks ever traveled in a covered wagon as such.
And when they moved then, did they move by train?
Yes, they always moved by train, by rail. And that meant that you had to rent a car. Now, you probably wouldn't need a whole freight car, but you'd have to pay rent on the car for the space that you used. And then they'd truck the furniture, haul the furniture down, put it in a freight car. And
who loaded the car then? Did you load it yourselves or the train people?
No, I think my dad probably put the stuff on. He and probably friends or somebody that was helping them move would put it in the freight car. And they'd just have to wait till the freight car got it to the destination, and then they'd go and unload it and haul it to the house.
Then from Greenfield, how'd you get back here to Lincoln? You went to school here, I know.
Well, first I graduated from high school in Greenfield.
And then after you graduated, what did you do?
All right, after I graduated, I took what was called a normal training course in high school. And that meant that I had to take what they called county examinations at the end of my senior year to become a teacher. And I took those county examinations and passed, and then I got a school to teach, a country school, just like the kind I had gone to school in, about 3 miles from home. And the year after I was out of high school, I was only 18, I taught this country school. I rode horseback about 3 miles to school and made my own fires, did all my own janitor work, and taught. I had 15 kids in this school, and they ranged from a pair of little twins who were just starting to school up through 3 kids that were in the 8th grade that had to pass the 8th grade examination that year to get into high school.
And you lived at home then?
Yes, I lived at home. I rode back and forth all the time.
And what do you remember about teaching? Do you remember any problems?
Oh, no, not too many. I think I had more problems with discipline than anything else. A girl 18 years old is not old enough to go out and cope with a bunch of youngsters age from kindergarten up through the 8th grade. And I don't remember any really bad problems I had, but I can remember that some of the people in the district didn't think that I was strict enough for the kids, so I let them get by with too much. That's about the only thing I really remember. But it was a struggle. I mean, I probably wasn't the best teacher in the world, but I did the best I could.
Then how long did you do that?
Just 1 year.
Just 1 year?
Just 1 year. And my folks moved back here to Nebraska, and when I was through with that school year, then I came back to Nebraska, here to Lincoln, where the folks were. And I couldn't decide what I wanted to do. My mother wanted me to go to Wesleyan so badly. She just thought I should get right into summer school. So I registered for courses at Wesleyan for summer school, and that did not pan out, because you can't take a person like I was, just a kid practically, out of a country town, and bring him in and put him in a college class in the middle of the summer. In the summertime, courses are heavy anyway. Mm-hmm. And that just didn't work out. I quit that. And then I didn't know what I was going to do. So I had some money saved from having taught school, and I finally decided I'd go to business college. And so that's what I did. I went to the Lincoln School of Commerce. It was down on 14th and O. And that's where I got my business training.
Where did your folks live then, when they lived here?
They lived out here at 5235 Walker.
And then, where did you live then? Did you live at home then?
Oh yes, I went back and forth. There was a trolley car that went south of our home, came up through and out to Bethany. And I used to take that it was about 3 blocks south of Walker Street, came up through there. What was the name of that? I'm trying to think. Can't remember the name of that crazy thing. And then there was the other one that came up through 48th Street, another, traction company. The traction company came up through North 48th Street. And that was also, what do you want to call it? Not a bus line, streetcar.
Yeah. Is that the one that went out to Havelock then?
Yes, that was one that went on out to Havelock. And that's the way I went back and forth to Lincoln on the streetcar.
And then your folks, how long did they stay here? During that time, what was your dad doing then?
He was working in drugstores.
Here in Lincoln?
Helping out, yeah, here in Lincoln.
Where you worked?
Yes, he worked at Baker Hardware one summer, or Baker Pharmacy one summer.
Over in Havelock?
Over in Havelock, yeah. And that was the summer that he was substituting over there while Mr. Baker and his wife and daughter went on vacation. And while they were on vacation, they were out in a boat, and the boat turned over and they all 3 drowned. And he worked there, and then he worked at various other places around for people that were on vacation. He never did really have a store of his own, but they only stayed here a year and then they went back to Iowa again.
Now, why did you decide to do that, you know?
Because I guess because he couldn't find work here, he decided he better go back on the farm. That's all I can remember. My folks were regular tramps, I'll tell you. They didn't stay in one place very long.
What year was that?
Well, let's see. That was right after, that must have been in 1924, because it was right after I had finished teaching at home and come out here.
Yeah.
And I stayed. Then when they went back home, back to Greenfield, I got a room and board, and I stayed here.
And where did you board there?
And, I was on North 27th Street. Now, wait a minute. Maybe I'm getting ahead of my story.
You lived down here at Butler's sometime.
Yeah, that was later on, though. But I lived downtown. I lived down on M Street for a while, 17th and M. And that was about the time then I was getting ready to, I was almost through with my business college training, trying to find a job.
Was that hard to do, find a job then?
Well, not really. I applied for several jobs. I applied for one at the university in the office there, and that they hired somebody that had more experience. I didn't get that job. Then I applied at a wholesale grocery, and I didn't really want that job. I didn't like that man that had interviewed me. I really didn't care for him. And then I applied at the Lincoln Liberty Life, and a man that was in charge there, I don't know whether he was a president or, anyway, he had known my folks in years past. He had grown up in Beatrice when my mother was growing up, and he knew the family. Well, they hired me, and that's where I started to work in 1924. I think it was 1924. Must have been. And I worked there for 3 months, and they sold out to Midwest Life.
Oh, that's how you got to Midwest Life?
Yeah. And so then I worked at Midwest Life and all the rest of the time.
How long did you work there until?
Well, now these dates are not quite lining up, because I worked almost 10 years at Midwest Life, and still I know. We were married in 1930. Yeah. I worked at Midwest Life almost 10 years before I quit. That's the only place I ever worked then after I got a job and got out of business college. Midwest is the only place I worked.
Then your folks went back and forth. They stayed there then?
Yeah, then the folks went back. And then they bought this Chi-Hawk farm, and that's where they lived then until they retired.
Who was their neighbor next door that used to?
Culver, Roy Culver.
Roy Culver.
Yeah, Roy and Zay Culver lived next door to him there on the farm.
Who were some of the other people that you knew in Greenfield?
Lou Wolf
Yeah.
lived up on the hill there. You remember the summer that Lou Wolf and my dad got in the dispute? Were you out there that summer?
I don't remember that. What was that all about?
I don't remember, but I think it was because the cattle were getting over into Dad's farm, and Dad didn't like that. Of course, the cattle would tear up his corn crops, and finally they were really having a problem. And Lou Wolf finally told my dad, he says, well, you get your man and I'll get mine. I don't know how it ended up, but anyway, they had quite a time that summer. But it was mostly over the fact that the cattle would get into Dad's crops, and of course he didn't like that. And he was having a problem over that.
Well, then after you got here in Lincoln, where'd you meet Dad then?
Now you would ask me that. My friend and I used to stag it to a dance. We went to a little lodge hall that was at that time on N Street, about 12th and N, in along there. It was a small hall, It was a lot of fun. We used to have a good time up there. But she and I would stag it up there to dances, and that's where I met Harold.
Now, who was your friend then?
Ellen Morris was the name of the girl. That she and I were friends. We had gotten acquainted at business college, and then we used to stag it up there to those dances. And Harold used to come, and he'd bring a whole bunch of girls. He was always up there with 3 or 4 girls. He'd pick up all his friends, his girlfriends, and bring them up there to that dance. Well, that's where we met, when we got to. And he was such a good dancer. I used to just love to dance with him. And that's where we got acquainted.
Well, what did they have for music? What bands played? You remember?
Oh, just little pickup bands. No, I can't really remember the names of any of the bands up there.
Do you remember any musicians that played?
No, not up there.
Jess Williams or any of those?
Might have been Jess. I don't know at that time. I know later on when we used to go to the park and dance a lot. Or Jess Williams would play there, and they'd have good bands come in there.
You remember any of the songs they used to play from those dances?
Oh, goodness, let's see. No, I just can't really remember the names of any of the songs, really.
So how did these dances work? How much did you have to pay everybody?
Oh, about a nickel to get in, a nickel or a dime to get in, or quarter maybe. And we'd dance all evening, and they'd have intermission.
They have tables or just chairs around the side?
Just chairs around along the wall.
Did they have any places that used automatic musical instruments like coin-operated player pianos or things like that?
You mean to dance by?
Yeah, or in restaurants. Do you remember any of those types of things?
Not at that time, no. A little bit later they did, but I can't remember that they did then.
Yeah.
Not that early.
So then, when did you really start going with Dad as far as dating and stuff?
Well, we went to these dances quite a little, and it wasn't long until he began asking me for dates. I can't just remember. But he had been going with another girl. He'd been going with Mildred Jeffrey, and he had gone with her for about 6 months. And then Mildred and I became friends. We got acquainted. I can't just remember where. I think maybe at East Lincoln Christian Church, because we went over there to church, to Sunday school. I did some. And first thing I knew, she said something to me about Harold, and I said, well, yeah, I'd had some dates with him. And she says, well, I've been going with him for 6 months. She was a little bit upset about the whole situation. But
you remained friends, didn't you? Because I remember that name.
Oh, yes, yeah, we were friends. And then later on, after we were married, we lived out here in College View, and Mildred and Fred, her husband, lived out there, and we were friends, We used to go back and forth together. But we started to date quite soon after we got acquainted at this little dance hall, and then he'd take me other places. We used to dance at the park a lot. And
which park is that?
Antelope Park, out there at the pavilion at Antelope. That was a grand place to dance. It's just too bad they don't have those nice dances. Now you go out there and pay a nickel a dance, and they always had good music, and that floor was good. And in the summertime, they'd have the doors open on both sides, and have ticket takers at the door. You could buy your tickets, and you could go in and dance twice or 3 times or how often.
You mean a nickel for every time you dance?
Yeah,
So?
Yeah, if you go dance 10 dances, it costs you 50 cents. And
wasn't that pretty expensive at that time or not?
Well, no, I don't think it was. I don't remember it was.
What other things do you remember doing on dates?
I think about the first summer after we started going together, Harold liked to swim, and we were going to go to Seward. We'd go swimming, and it was in the summertime. And I didn't have a bathing suit. So for my birthday, he bought me a red bathing suit, and we went swimming. And we swam a lot. We went swimming quite a bit. And that red bathing suit faded every time I went swimming. I'd come home and the towel and everything would be red. I don't know. It never changed the bathing suit's color, but it sure faded.
Where did you swim at Seward?
They had a a nice swimming
their
pool.
pool?
Oh yeah, they had a good swimming pool there. Nice big slide, and it was really a nice. It was a nicer place to swim than Lincoln had at that time.
Did you ever go out to Capitol Beach or what?
Oh yes, yes, we spent lots of time out there, but we didn't swim out there. That's when they had the amusement park out there. They had the rolling coaster. Oh, it was fun to ride on that thing.
What else did they have out there?
They had the fun house, and that had a huge, great big slide in it. That
Was that the same one we used to go on?
Did you go out to the slide?
Yeah.
Well,
I never went down. Joanne went down. I think, but I was always afraid to go down.
Yeah, it's the same one.
And the barrel. And
the barrel, and the air holes that they used to, yeah. And the saucer, they had a saucer, you know, that you sit out on.
I remember that.
You sit down on, try to stay on. That was
fun. Speed up and slide off.
Yes.
Did anybody ever stay on that? I can't remember.
I never did. I don't know whether anybody ever did or not. Yeah, let's see, what else did they have out there?
Well,
These little shooting galleries, those types of things.
They used to have a Ferris wheel and merry-go-round.
Yes, that's right, yeah. That was a nice amusement park, really.
What other places around town did you go?
Well, let's see. I can't remember that we used to go to shows. He was a good host. He used to take me a lot of places. We'd go to shows, and he didn't always have a lot of money to spend. I can remember lots of times we'd go, maybe to a dance or to a show, and we always thought we had to have something to eat afterwards. And I can remember a lot of times he'd say, "Now don't order a banana split tonight. I've only got so and so left." So even if it was just an ice cream cone, we usually got something after we'd gone out.
He was working at the Journal then?
He was working as
at
the Star, yeah. He was collector for classified advertising at the Star. Worked on a commission, and that's what he was doing. And he worked there all the time. That was what he did. And we went together. You see, we went together. What was it? 4 years before we finally got married. And the month after we were married, they put him inside in the bookkeeping department at $25 a week, $22.50 a week, I think it was, to begin with.
And that's when he worked for her, but the Star then.
Yeah, and then when the Star and the Journal went together, they put him over at the Journal as bookkeeper under Elam Sechrist.
Oh.
Elam Sechrist was the head of the bookkeeping department at the Journal, and he worked for Elam Sechrist at the Journal.
Now, how long did he work for you?
Quite a little while, and I can't remember how long. I don't remember how long Elam was there after he got in there.
Did he die then eventually?
I think he did, yeah.
This is Dick Spencer, and the date is April 7th, 1980, and this is a continuation of the tape that was started March 1st, 1979, visiting with my mother, Dorothy P. Spencer, and we're at her house in Lincoln, 2904 North 51st. And when we left off last time, Mom, we were talking about Dad had just got promoted and moved inside the Journal, and you had just gotten married. You talked about, when you used to go to dances together, and that's about where we were, I guess, at that point. So, continuing on from there, you talked about when you met Dad and dancing. What was your wedding like? I don't think we talked anything about that.
I don't think we did either. I was thinking about that. I don't think we mentioned that.
Where were you married?
I was married at 448 South 29th Street here in Lincoln. I lived with a friend of mine. She and her husband had been married a couple years before, and I roomed and boarded with them. Lola Ruth Robertson and Russell were their names, Russell Robertson. And I was married at her house on Sunday afternoon at 4 o'clock, the 29th of June.
Now, why'd you
1930.
Why'd you pick her house? Just because she was a good friend? Or?
She was a good friend, and we were just having a small wedding, and I just liked this little home wedding. That's what I wanted.
Who married you? Do you remember?
I think the man's name was Dr. Aitken. He was the pastor of the First Christian Church here in Lincoln. Mm-hmm. And we had gone to that church a little bit, and so he's the one that married us.
Do you remember who came?
Oh yes, my folks were here, Mom and Dad, and
where'd they live then?
They lived in Greenfield. Yeah, they lived in Greenfield, and they came, and see, we had the house at 5235 Walkers, where we were going to live. It was a home that the folks had bought when they were here, when they lived here in Lincoln. And they had moved back to Iowa, and they had turned the house over to me. And so Harold and I were going to live there, and we had been fixing it up. And when the folks came for the wedding, they stayed there at the house. And my sister was there, Jean, and Don, and
now was Don living with you then? He wasn't, was he? He was still in Greenfield?
Well, he was just a little boy then.
He was.
See, Don was just a little guy.
Oh, okay.
He was the youngest of the family, you see. He was just a little guy.
I guess it was Bob or something.
Yeah, Bob lived with us after we were married. But they all lived here, so all the Spencer relatives here in town, Grandma Spencer and Paul and Victor, Harold's brothers, and Bob, and Elsabert was just a little gal then too. They were all at the wedding. All the relatives. Aunt Alma was there. And then besides the relatives, the folks that I worked with in the office, quite a few of I invited all the girls that worked in the office, which it was a good-sized office, and there were probably, maybe 25 or 30 there altogether. Mm-hmm. It's just a small wedding.
Were most weddings in homes then?
A lot of them were, yeah. A lot of them were. Then after the wedding, we went, friends of mine took us up to Omaha. We stayed at the Hotel Fontanelle in Omaha.
Oh, yeah. What year was this?
1930.
What was the date that you remember?
June 29th, 1930.
And then where'd you go from Omaha?
All right, and the next morning we went to see our friends Clodagh and Ernest Peterson, and they lived in I can't quite remember the name of the town. They lived someplace in Iowa. I can't remember the name of the town. I'd have to look that up. But we went there and spent a few days with them. And then we went on up to Okoboji and was up there for about 4 or 5 days, had a little cabin up there. And then we went down to Greenfield to the folks and spent a few days there, and then came on back to Lincoln.
So you were gone about 2 weeks?
We were gone about 2 weeks altogether, yeah.
Did you send out invitations to your wedding? Was that
yes.
The way
yes, we sent out invitations to the wedding. And we had after the wedding we had punch and cake, and it was usual little reception afterwards right there in Lola's house.
The house over on Walker that you moved into then, was that vacant for a while, or did you rent it out yourself before you moved in there? Or do you remember how that worked?
I think there were some people renting it. I think there were some people renting it, and before we moved into it. And then when they moved out, we worked out there and cleaned it up, and we lived there for about 2 years, I think it was. And no, we moved out in February of 1933.
Then did your folks sell the house then?
Yeah, then we got rid of the house then. In February 43, we moved to 2956 South 47th Street.
And what was that you rented?
We rented that, yeah. It was just a real nice little bungalow that had been all fixed up and cleaned up, and it was just a real pretty little place, and we lived there 6 months, and they sold that, and we had to move again.
And then where'd you move to?
Then our next move was to 2327 South 33rd. We moved there in May in 1934.
And what kind of place was that?
It was a little bungalow too, just a small 5-room house, bungalow type house. And Joanne was about, let's see, she was about a year old when we moved in there.
So Joanne was born which place then?
Joanne was born when we lived on Walker. She was born at 5235 Walker. And when we moved out of there, see, she was born in, let me see, I gotta think my dates through here. In August 1933. There's something wrong. Yeah, that date's not right. She was born in August 33.
Was she born on Walker or the second place you lived?
No, she was born on Walker Street because Jenkins, I remember the Jenkins were next door, and Joanne was born at home. I didn't go to the hospital when Joanne was born. Grandma came over, Grandma Van Dyke came over from Greenfield, and we hired a nurse, and I stayed there at home. So she was born on Walker Street.
Now what do you mean you hired a nurse?
The nurse came in and she took care of the baby, bathed her and took care of her.
But you had a doctor one.
Oh yes, oh sure. The doctor was there too. Yeah, he came. He stayed all night the night Joanne was born. He just stayed right there all night. That's the way the doctors did a lot in those days.
So probably more babies were born at home.
A lot of babies were born at home, and there were a lot born in the hospital too, but that was during the Depression. That was about the time the Depression started, and we just didn't have a lot of money. And we figured it would be cheaper that way, and Grandma said she'd come, and so that's the way we did it.
Well, how did the Depression affect you very much at that point?
Well, quite a bit. We didn't have a telephone. Then after Joanne was born, we decided we'd have to have a phone, so we had a phone put in, but we didn't have a telephone up until that time. And during the Depression, Harold had to take vacation without pay. He got his salary cut, one salary cut, and then the next year, when vacation time came, he had to take his vacation without pay. So we felt the Depression, yes.
Well, go on. Let's go through those other places you live briefly.
All right. Then we lived 2327 South 33rd. When we moved in there, we moved in there in May 34, and that was the spring that I had my gallbladder out, and I was in the hospital when they moved because I had to have my surgery. And Paul and Marie, Harold's brother Paul and Marie, came down, and Marie took care of the baby, and Paul helped Harold move. And they moved to 2327. We moved 2327 South 33rd in May 1934.
Now, when you moved, how'd you move? In cars, or
yes.
Get a truck or a trailer, or what?
I think mostly in cars. That they may have rented a truck for the bigger things that they couldn't get in cars, but everything that we could move, we moved ourselves in cars.
Did you have much furniture?
Oh, we had living room furniture and bedroom furniture. We had a bedroom set.
Was it that set that Joanne has now, or was that?
Yes, that was the one that Joanne took.
What about the old table we used to have in this house? Was that same dining room table that we had for so long?
Yes, that's the one. That round table or oval table that I used to have is the only dining room table we ever had beside this one. Yeah, we had a table and 6 chairs, dining room chairs. We had a buffet, and the usual amount of furniture for a small house. And that it was all moved by truck, the big pieces. But we'd pack our dishes and our clothing, and it was really a big job. Moved a lot of it.
Okay, where else then did you go from?
Okay, we lived in we lived on South 33rd until we moved in there in May, and in the spring of 1935, now this was during the Depression, Grandma Spencer had made an apartment upstairs at her house at 1325 North 24th. And she and her two kids, she and Bob and Elsbert, lived upstairs. And Harold and I moved over there and rented the downstairs from her. And lived there to try to help her out because she needed help so desperately. And it reduced our rent a little bit too because we didn't have to pay. We'd been paying $25 a month for rent on this house on South 33rd. And I think we paid her about $18 a month.
And then you paid the utilities besides that too?
Yeah, and then we had the utilities too. So we lived there from the spring of 1935 until January 1936. And then we moved out to 5403 Calvert. Another real nice little clean 5-room bungalow.
Now, is that where I was born?
No, you haven't been born yet.
Oh, okay.
You're still coming.
All right.
We lived there on Calvert Street. It was a real nice little place, and oh, it heated so well. We had such a good little furnace there, and there was just one thing wrong with that place. One thing I just disliked immensely, and that is it didn't have gas, and I had to use a little gasoline stove to cook on, and I was scared to death of that stove. It was the kind of a stove, I don't suppose they even make them anymore. You had to pump it up, to pump up the pressure, and then turn the gasoline on, light the burner, and I was just scared to death of that stove.
Sounds like same kind as our camp stove.
Yeah, I think it was probably the same idea. But that's what it was a pretty little stove. It wasn't a bad looking stove at all. It was real cute, but I was just scared to death of that stove. And but that was a nice little house, and we enjoyed living down there. But then we lived there until October 1937. We moved to 3801A Street in October, in that fall. And we lived there, and then you were born July 1938. That's where you were born. Was when we lived at 3801A Street.
And I was born in the hospital.
But yes, I went to the hospital when you were born.
Which hospital?
Bryan Memorial. And I went to the hospital, and Elsbert then was a girl about, what was she, 16, 17 years old, and she came and stayed with Dad and took care of Joanne. Joanne was 5 years old. And she took care of her while I was in the hospital. And then Marie, Paul's wife in Omaha, was expecting a baby about the same time. And I had just gotten home from the hospital a few days when they called from Omaha and asked Elsbert to come up there because Jeanette had been born. So she went right up to Omaha and helped out up there. And then from 38th and A, we moved to Waverly. When we lived at 38th and A, though, let's go back there a little bit. Harold's mother got let out completely from Miller and Payne. She'd been working Miller and Payne all the time, and
what'd she do at Miller and Payne?
She was a seamstress, worked in the alteration department, and business was bad, and of course she was getting older, and they let her out. Well, they had nothing to live on, so she moved in with us, and we'd only been there a little while when we knew we had to have a bigger place. So we looked around and found this place out in Waverly. It was a real nice big old house, and we moved out there in May of 1939. and Elsebert and Bob and Grandma Spencer lived with us out there. Elsebert would come back and forth. She was going to Lincoln High then, and she'd go back and forth to school. And sometimes she stayed in town all the time, and then there'd be times that she'd ride back and forth with Harold.
Where'd she stay when she stayed?
With Victor, her other brother here
Oh,
in
yeah.
town. Victor and Coletta. She lived there for part of the time.
And then from there you moved here.
Yes, we lived out there in Waverly until August 1941, and that was about the time. That was just a little before that. The government had stepped in and was looking over the books of a lot of these firms, and they'd find people who had done work that they were not being paid for. That is, their salaries weren't up to what they should have been. I can't remember what they called that. They had some big long name for that. Anyway, they came and inspected the books at the Journal, and Dad had not been getting the salary that he should have gotten. So he had to get a lot of, they had to pay him a lot of back pay. The Journal did. And he got quite a bit. It was around $600 or maybe a little bit over that. And he began talking about a new car right away. And I said, we aren't buying a new car, we're going to get ourselves a home. So that's when we started looking around, and that's when we bought this house here in Lincoln.
Did you look at it a lot before you bought it?
No, we came in one Sunday to look at houses. We looked at this house, and then we looked at one on South 48th Street first. We went down there and looked at that one. Then we came out here and looked at this, and we walked in here, and oh, it looked so big and such a nice house. And I thought to myself, we'll never be able to buy this house. And they wanted $800 down. The price of the whole thing, the house and the lot, was $4,000. They wanted $800 down, and we only had $600. And they were real anxious to sell because this place was in an estate. So they came down on their down payment to $600, and so we could buy it. And we didn't look anyplace else. This is the only place we looked at.
And it had the barn back.
Yes, there was a barn and had all the land clear to the alley, and yeah, it had the barn back there.
So then you stayed right here since.
Yes, yeah. Oh yeah, we stayed right here. We had a chance. See, that was in August. We moved in here the 22nd of August, 1941. And we had paid $3,800 for the place. And that fall, we hadn't lived here more than about 4 months or so. That fall, some real estate man came to the door looking for some property in this corner of town. And he would like to have shown it. He wanted to show it. He said, I can get $5,000 for this place, easy for you. And Dad said no. He said, we're not even going to show it. He said, we bought it for our home, and he said, we're not even going to show it. We aren't interested in selling. So and we've stayed right here ever since.
When you moved in, was it in pretty good repair? I mean, as far as
Yes,
the
they had
walls?
been cleaning it up. Yes, they had been cleaning it up because they had it on the market and wanted to sell it. So they had done quite a bit of work, and it was in good shape. It had been taken care of all the time.
And do you remember how much land this included at one time? Apparently it was more than just the house and the barn, wasn't it? Probably some other property around, like a little acreage, or not?
Well, not to my knowledge. I don't know of any more land around except just these two lots. It was kind of like a two-lot. About 2 lots is what you'd call it. I don't.
Why would they put a barn on a place that only has 2 lots like this?
Well, that I can't tell you. I think they had had cattle back there. I think they had probably because the barn had a second floor to it. It was, and it had steps to go up, and I don't really know why.
Did it have cattle stalls in it, or anything? I can't remember for sure.
I don't remember that it had cattle stalls, but I know we had chickens out there for a while.
Oh, you did?
Yes, I used to have baby chickens. Yeah, we had chickens out there.
Huh.
Fixed, kind of pinned off the one side of it, and it had a fence around this west side here, and the west side of the barn.
Yeah.
And I had chickens out there. We used to have garden out there. We had raspberries.
Yeah, I remember the garden, and strawberries.
Yeah, and strawberries. Yeah, there was a strawberry patch out there too.
Well, you think then somebody, I mean, if you had cattle or a cow or two, there wouldn't hardly be room. I guess you just have to feed them on hay and stuff.
There was a little sidewalk built out in the barn. Do you remember the sidewalk?
Yeah.
And there was a hydrant out there, but we never got any water out of it. I think the hydrant had been turned off sometime.
Yeah, I kind of remember that.
Don't you remember that hydrant out there?
Just barely, yeah. I think it got
there was
taken
one
out
out there.
sometime.
So that it had been fixed so that there could be cattle there if they, but I don't know whether there ever was any or not.
Well, going back to some of the earlier times when you were first married, what were some of the things you did for entertainment?
That's a joke. Now, we did very little for entertainment because we just didn't have any money to spend on entertainment. I'll just tell you, we didn't. We'd go to a show once in a while. That's the thing I remember the most. We used to go for car rides. That was our entertainment. Oh, Harold loved to drive. He always liked to drive, and I liked to ride. We'd get in the car every evening when it was nice and just take a little car ride. Maybe we'd work in the yard a while and then get in the car and go for a ride. But we didn't do much for entertainment.
But didn't that cost you money for gas, or wasn't that very expensive?
Well,
gas,
it wasn't expensive then. I mean, we didn't think of it as being expensive. You could ride quite a ways on a little bit of gas, and we didn't think about it as being expensive. No. On Sunday, lots of times we'd take a ride, and then when you kids got older, we went to church and Sunday school, and we were involved in things you kids did, and I just, we didn't do a lot for entertainment. We never went out to eat. It was unheard of to go out and eat a meal.
It seems like when I was a kid we used to go out and eat some, to me.
Well, we didn't do it then like they do now, I'll tell you.
Well, maybe not as much.
No.
But it seemed like when we'd go to Omaha or someplace, sometimes we'd stop and eat in Ashland.
Yes, we did that. And here's another thing I'll tell you I can remember now that we used to do once in a while. See, Dad worked for the Journal, and we could go up to a hotel and stay for free. Do you remember the times we used to go to Omaha and stay in the hotel? And on what's called a due bill, I guess that's what he called it.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was through the paper and the newspaper somewhere or other, and they'd pay the bill. I don't just remember how it worked, but we used to do that once in a while. And you kids got a big kick out of that.
Yeah, I remember once or twice going up there and then having breakfast brought up to the room.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff.
And then in the summertime, when Harold would have vacations, we went over to the farm, and but we didn't take trips. The first trip that we ever really took, you were 10, and I think Joanne was about 14 or 15. Was first. Do you remember the trip?
Went to Colorado.
Went to Colorado. Yeah. That's the first long trip that we ever took.
So, you did go back to Iowa quite often.
Oh, yes, we did. We went back to Iowa quite a bit. We'd go back to the farm he always got about 2 weeks vacation, 2 weeks paid vacation, except during the Depression he didn't, but we'd go back there and stay on the farm. spend our vacation, but we didn't do a lot for entertainment. Have picnics. We used to have picnics quite a bit in the summertime.
What about some of the get-togethers? I remember we used to go up to Lenomo Beach. How were those organized?
Yeah.
I remember we used to meet people up there.
Yeah, the folks from Omaha would come down. Maybe Kenneth and his wife or Don's and Merle and Ruth.
Mhm.
They used to, yes, we used to meet them up there at Omaha, up at Lenomo Beach, and go swimming. We did that in the summertime. Have a boat once in a while. Paddle around.
That was a pretty good swimming place.
That was a good place to swim, yeah.
I think that's where I learned to swim.
Probably is. Because we did go there quite a bit in the summertime.
Then you didn't work all the time
No.
when we were younger kids. You didn't work at all, did you?
No, I didn't work at all.
Well, you
I-
did cooking. and stuff
Yeah,
like
I
that.
did after you had grown up. I mean, you were still little,
Yeah.
but I worked when I was first married. I worked until we were married in June, and I worked until February before Joanne was born in August. I quit the 1st of February. Worked for the Midwest Live, and I worked until the 1st of February, and then I quit. And then I didn't work anymore at all. It was unusual for married women to work in those days. In fact, I wanted to work and knew I should work if we got married because we just didn't have much to start out on. And so I talked to the lady who was personnel manager at the Midwest in January and told her we'd like to get married in June, and wondered if I could work. Well, she had to think it over. And it took her a couple weeks to decide, but she finally decided that as long as I stayed healthy and could take care of my work as well as I did, why, I could work. So I worked until February.
So that was unusual then.
Yes, it was. It was unusual for a married woman to work.
When do you remember that changing for married women to work? Has it been so
Well,
recently, or was it during the war more? Or?
I think it's, yes, I think it started during the war because so many women worked during the war. And I think that's probably when the change took place. And then, of course, it's just grown more and more these last years, so that so many more women work now than ever used to.
What other things do you remember about the Depression, about problems people were having? Did any of our relatives have a lot of problems with jobs or?
Yes,
Work.
Merle worked for the Union Pacific in Omaha, and he got laid off, and that was, we still lived over here on Walker. We hadn't moved from Walker yet. And that winter that, that must have been about the winter of about when? 1932 or 33. Anyway, he was laid off several months, and he and his wife came down and lived with us for a little while. They had just had a new baby. They had just had their first baby. And they came down and lived at our place for several weeks. Then she finally went back to Omaha with the baby and lived at her folks until Merle was called back to work. But he was out of work that winter quite a while.
No, they came down just because he didn't have a job.
Yes, because he didn't have a
money.
job. He didn't have any money. They didn't have anything to live on. And
So did you
So-
kind of put him up then, or
yeah,
did they
well, yes, Merle
chip
did.
in too?
Merle did some carpenter work and things around the house, some things that needed to be done. He did some of that for us and stayed there. But then Harold's folks had a hard time. Paul, in particular, was out of work a long time.
What was he doing then? Was he working with trucks then?
I think he was. I think he was working, well, I'm sure he was, working as a mechanic and with trucks. And I know he made the remark that they had lived on oatmeal so long he never wanted to see any more oatmeal again after the Depression was over. Oh, dear. And let's see. We were, Harold and I were pretty lucky. You know, when you have to, you can always save a penny here and save a penny there if you have to. And he never lost any money, any salary, all during the Depression. We always had some money. And I can remember how he had an envelope that he would put every week. He got paid every week, and he'd take these envelopes. And he had one was for lights and gas, and one was for coal. We always had to buy coal, and rent. And he'd have these envelopes, and he'd put so much money each week into these envelopes for the different expenses to kind of build up, you know, keep a little money ahead. And it was nip and tuck, but he never lost any salary, and we never went hungry. We always had enough to eat.
Were there many beggars coming to the door at that time, even over here on Walker Street?
Well, over there at Walker, I can't remember them there so much because this was in town, but when we lived in Waverly, that's when we had them, because we were just a block off the railroad line there.
Yeah.
And we would get those men all the time coming wanting something to eat. And I remember once a couple fellas came, and Harold had something out in the, I think the chicken, we had chickens then too. I think the chicken house needed to be cleaned or something. Anyway, I can remember his putting them to work. He'd go out and tell them to do a certain, clean out a chicken house or something, and then we'd give them something to eat. But we had lots and lots of tramps, we called them at those times.
Any gypsies?
In Waverly. No, can't remember that we ever had any gypsies. The thing I can remember about the gypsies was when I was a girl in Iowa, we used to be scared to death of them. They'd come around before I left Iowa, when I was a girl. They'd travel around there in covered wagons and
steal things?
Yes, steal things. They'd camp on the school grounds, the country school grounds, and they were quite a nuisance when we were kids living in Iowa. We'd see them every once in a while.
What did Victor do during the Depression? Was he working yet or not?
He had a hard time keeping a job because he had no skills whatsoever. He finally got a job, I think it was driving a truck for the Ryder Composition Company. It was Annie Blanche's and Uncle Charlie's business here in town. And he finally got a job with them, and he worked for them for quite a long time.
Now, what do you mean composition? Did they set type?
Yes, they set type. And
who'd they sell it to then? Little printers?
Printing company, yeah, yeah. And he drove a truck for them. That's the way he started. Then I think he eventually got inside to do some work too, but he had a pretty hard time because he just didn't have any skills at all. And then when he finally got started at the Journal, then he got along better, and that's where he worked a lot of the time.
Well, he started there after the war, though, didn't he?
Yes, after the war. See, he was in the service, you see.
Yeah, right.
And then after he got out of the service, and he started at the Journal. But he had quite a time when he was younger, trying to keep a job.
Some of your other jobs, you worked up here at the Willard Sorority House,
Yes,
didn't you, as cook
yes, I
for a
cooked
while?
there for a year, and let's see.
Did you cook up at Westland, too?
No, I never worked at Westland. I never did anything at Westland. I think the next place I worked, I believe, was over at Northeast when I went over there to work in the cafeteria. And I worked in the cafeteria over there for, what, two or 3 years. And then the summer that you went to Canada on your canoe trip, you had been working for Picathley's over here on, where was that, 49th and Greenwood. Yes. You remember that? You worked over there. And when you left to go to Canada on that trip, I went over there and worked. And then I stayed there and worked until till they didn't need any more help. into the winter. I can't remember just how long I worked there, quite a while. And I think I worked through the winter there, and then in the spring I quit, and I didn't work at all, and then I decided I wanted to go back to work that fall, and Dad didn't want me to go up to the school and cook anymore. He said that was too hard a job. So I went down to the public school administration building, decided I'd see if I could get into a school office someplace. So I went down there to put in my application, and Mr. Sell was in charge of the business affairs. And he told me that there was a job opening, part-time, that's what I wanted, a part-time job opening out here at Norwood Park School, out on the edge of Havelock. And I didn't even know where the school was, and I sat there and visited with him about it, and he said, well, if you get in the car and drive out there and see, and he said, if you're interested, why, you let me know. So we went out there and found out where it was, and he said, if you want the job, you can have it. So I went out and checked it out to see where it was, and I called him and told him I'd like to have it. So that's when I started in the school offices.
Now, what year was that, approximately?
That must have been about 1954. Yeah, that was in 1954. And so I started there and worked part-time until, let's see, then you graduated from high school in 56, didn't you? Yes.
Yes.
You graduated in 56. I think it was in 58 that there was a full-time job opening over here at Huntington, and they called me and asked me if I would like to work at Huntington full-time. So then I took that, and I worked there until I had to retire in 1965.
So how long were you at Huntington then?
12 years.
12 years.
Yeah, I was there 12 years. Yeah.
I don't know why. It seemed like maybe you worked more schools than that, but I guess that's
No.
the only two, isn't
Yeah, I just worked in the 2 schools during the time, and that's...
it? Did you take some typing again then, or
No.
anything, or did you start typing again?
No,
How did you do
I
that?
hadn't even touched a typewriter for about 20 years, and I went out to Norwood Park that day to start out, and I just had a terrible time because the principal, it was the day for the kids to come for registration, and I didn't know anything about what I was supposed to do. The principal wasn't there, and I had a terrible time getting started. No, I hadn't done any typing, but after you've done typing, it kind of comes back to you, and I got along pretty good, got started, and worked out real well.
Well, now, aside from going to a few movies, though, for entertainment, you didn't do much. Did you
No.
eat out very often?
No.
You didn't eat out
No.
before you had kids either very often?
No, we didn't. No, we didn't. See, we were both working. I think that makes a little difference. We were both working, and I'd come home at night, and there'd be so many things I'd want to do around home. I think we were just kind of homebodies, Dick. I don't think people didn't do the things then that they do now. We used to go maybe to a dance once in a while, but not very often. And we just didn't do a lot of things for entertainment. We bought a nice Spartan radio. We had a real nice radio. My goodness,
That
your
was
dad.
the big one in the
Yes,
cabinet, yeah.
yes. And he'd always get such a kick out of buying those things, and just like a kid with a new toy.
Huh.
And no, we just really didn't do an awful lot for entertainment.
Did you always have gardens? Quite
Oh
often?
yes, we always had a garden. Yes, we always had a garden. We had a good garden there when we lived on Walker. We had a garden spot, and about the only time we didn't have a garden was in 1934, when it was during the drought years. And the place we lived at, well, I had had surgery, so I wasn't able to do anything much at all in the yard that summer. But the ground was terrible there. I don't think we had a garden there. And we didn't have any garden in 1935 when we lived over his mother's either. But when we moved out to Calvert Street, We had a real nice little garden spot in the back, and we had a good garden out there all the time. And then when we moved to Waverly, we always had a nice big garden. When we lived in Waverly, now, we belonged to a card club out there, and we did do some things out there. And we used to go to church and go to the church dinners and do things like that.
Did you always can stuff then from the garden?
Yes, yes. One of those summers that we lived in Waverly, I canned 400 quarts just of tomato stuff.
400
Juice,
quarts?
yes. We had tomatoes that one year that were beautiful. And I'd say, and they were 50 cents a bushel. And they were just beautiful big tomatoes. And I'd go down to the store and I'd see those tomatoes and I'd buy a bushel and take them home and I'd say, I'm not going to buy any more. That's all I'm going to do. And we'd go back the next time and there were those beautiful big tomatoes and I'd get some more. And that one year I canned 400 quarts of, some of it was juice, some of it just tomatoes, and I made some meat sauce, and but I always canned a lot, yeah.
What happened to all those jars?
I wish I had some of them now
Yeah.
sometimes. Then when we moved in here, the first summer that we lived here, we had such a nice garden. I canned 40 quarts just of beans that year.
Mm-hmm.
Just beans.
So you didn't grow all those tomatoes in Waverly?
No, I didn't grow all, no, we didn't grow all the tomatoes I canned out there. But it was one of those years when the tomatoes were very plentiful and they were just so nice.
Where'd you learn how to can? Is that something
From
you
my
did
mother.
on the farm?
Oh, yes, I used to help Mama do those things when I was a girl, and you just kind of learn by doing. I canned lots of stuff.
Did you ever have much stuff spoil?
Yes, I lost things. Especially, I think, the year we moved, when we moved from Calvert up to A Street, I had lost quite a few cans of tomatoes. But I think it was because the jar lids got loosened in moving. I think that's the reason we lost so much that year. But usually I didn't lose anything very much. But I always can quite a bit.
Now,
Make jelly and...
how did you make your jelly? Do you remember that?
Well, yeah, you have to take the fruit and boil it, and mostly grape jelly is what I made. And then strain it through a jelly cloth, to get the juice, just the juice, and then use I usually used either Certo or Sure-Gel or something like that, so that you don't have to cook it so long. And I made jelly, and I made jam, peach jam, and when fruit was plentiful and wasn't too expensive to buy.
Now, you never raised much fruit of your own, did you? You usually
No,
bought fruit, didn't you?
that's right. When we lived in Waverly, we had some real good apple trees, but that is about the only place I think that we ever had fruit of our own.
But you had grapes out here in back.
Yeah, there was
but
grapes out here. Yes, that's right.
They
There
never
were.
did very good, did they?
Well, we had quite a few there one year. Oh, you remember the grape juice I used to make?
Yeah.
We were talking about that once when I was down there,
Mhm.
where I got that recipe. I
Yeah.
know where I got it,
Where?
from Edna Lewis.
Oh, you did?
Yes, we were talking about that. Edna and I was talking about that one day, and she said, well, I'll tell you where you got that recipe. She says, you got that from me. And I remembered that now. I got that recipe from Edna, because she was talking about the way she used to make it, and I said, well, that's where I got that recipe then. It was from you. Yeah.
How'd we get those chickens home? I remember being here, but I don't remember. Why'd we bring chickens from the farm?
You mean live chickens?
Yeah, didn't you bring live chickens
Yeah,
from the
yeah,
farm?
we did a
No?
few times, just in a crate. We just brought them to eat.
And then you'd fix them after we got
Fix them after
here.
we got here, yeah. Hmm.
How'd you fix them?
Well, depended on what kind they were. If they were the older hens, boil them and make chicken and noodles or cream chicken. I think the ones we brought though mostly were chickens to fry, young chickens, because Mama always had so many.
How many did you bring at a time? Do you
Oh,
remember that?
about 3 or 4 in a crate, whatever we could bring. Couldn't bring too many because
Remember how you used to kill them?
you would ask me that. Well, I had various means. I'd tie their legs together, hang them over a clothesline, and take a good sharp butcher knife and go right across the neck with it.
Now, did you cut the whole head off when you did that, or just
Uh,
bleed them?
You can just bleed them. You can do it either way. Then Mama's favorite way, and the way she taught me, and the way I did it for a lot of years, was to step on their head, put their head down on the ground, put your foot on it, and you give it a yank. And then you have to throw the chicken, you see, because it bleeds and the chicken kicks
Yeah, that's
and
right.
flops all around. But I thought it was better to hang them on the clothesline.
I remember that was pretty exciting because then they made a big mess out there.
Yes, they did.
Or if they were loose, they'd flop around a lot. And I
Yeah,
remember watching
yeah.
that go on quite a bit.
Yeah. Yes, I learned to do that from my mother.
Let's see, what other things we want to cover?
Well,
What about different cars that you had? You remember much about the cars?
well, just a minute here. In 1931, we bought, in July 1931, we bought a brand new Plymouth. It was a Plymouth two-door, and we paid about $850 for it. A brand new car. We drove that to Illinois that year.
Did you buy that on payments, or?
Yes, I'm sure. Yes, I'm sure that's the way
Well,
we
you
bought
must
it.
not have been too poor then if you bought a
Well,
new car. That was the beginning. That was a depression. Wasn't it?
31, it hadn't quite hit yet then.
Hadn't?
No. 33 and 34 is when it really started. Then I can't remember. Harold traded cars so often. There's a bunch in between there. After we moved to Waverly, this is one thing I can remember. After we moved to Waverly, he bought a Hudson. Now, don't ask me what year it was. I have no idea. It was a nice car, but he had a lot of trouble with that thing till the mechanics finally got the bugs worked out of it. But it was a nice car.
Well, that was 36 Hudson.
Was it a 36?
If that's the one we had when we moved here. Used to have a red hood ornament, kind of.
Did we still have that when
Yeah.
Well, maybe we did. Okay. Then after we had the Hudson, then maybe then is when we got the Dodge. We had a Dodge. Do you remember the Dodge that we had?
Well, we had a Nash in there too.
Or maybe it was the Nash we bought first.
I
Because
think
it might have been, because I think we drove that Dodge to Washington, D.C. when we came out there. Didn't we have what did we have when we
so. I
drove?
think so. Yeah.
I think we did too.
But what do you have before the Hudson? Do you remember that?
I think it was still
Plymouth.
Plymouth. The new one that we bought. Because you see, we bought that in 31.
Yeah, that's right.
And then we moved out to Waverly in 30, what did I say?
39, wasn't it?
Did we drive that car that long? Did we have any? I expect we did, though. That was a new car. Yeah, I
Probably
think
did.
so, yeah. Because I'm sure it was after we moved to Waverly that we bought the Hudson.
And then after that, you had the
The
Nash,
Nash,
and then the
and then
Dodge.
well, we had a Pontiac,
Oh
too.
yeah, you had the Pontiac.
We had a
I
Pontiac.
think you had the Pontiac when you went to Washington, didn't you?
Maybe we did. Maybe we did.
I can't remember now.
I know the car we drove out there used so much oil that he took a case of oil along, and he had to put a quart of oil in every 100 miles. We didn't have any car trouble, but we sure used a lot of oil getting there and back. But I can't, he was always trading cars. He was
What was?
a lot of cars.
Now I remember the basement used to be before the apartment was in there, and when did you? I remember you used to have a wringer washer down there. When did you get that washer? Was that after you moved here, or what kind of washing machines did you have?
Well, we had Yeah, the washer we had when we moved here had a wringer on it, but it wasn't an automatic. It was just a conventional machine.
Right.
But we had a wringer, and the tubs, you remember the rinse tubs? Yeah. Well, we used those until we bought our first washer and dryer in 1954 after I got my job at the schools. That's when we bought our first automatic washer.
When did you get your first washer, though? Was that something you hauled around from place to place?
Oh, yes, yes. Those conventional washers, yeah, we always took that, yeah.
How many of those did you have? Do you remember? I remember the green one that you had before you had the white Speed Queen that had the wringer on it. That was the last wringer washer you had, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And you had a green one before that. Do you remember that one?
Yes, I
Real
do.
old?
Yes, I remember that. I think we bought that when we lived on Walker, right after we were married. The green one, you mean? Yeah. Because it was so cold there that we kept it out in our little back porch. But on days I was going to wash, we'd have to roll that thing into the kitchen and let it warm up, else it wouldn't run. It would get so cold that it wouldn't run. Yeah, we had the green one, and then the Speed Queen, conventional. And then in 1954, we bought the automatic washer.
What did you have for vacuum cleaners? Do you remember that?
Oh, yes, we had a Eureka for a long time. In fact, I think that was the first one we bought, if I can remember correctly.
Did you always have a vacuum cleaner as near as you can remember when you were married, or did you?
No, we didn't when we were
Have a
first married.
sweeper
I
or
just
what?
used a broom. I used a broom for quite a while, and then we finally got a sweeper, but I can't remember just when we bought it. But we didn't have one when we were first married, I know that. But we had a Eureka, and I can't remember. I think, no, I can't remember what other kind we had, but I know we had a Eureka, because that's what I've got now, that last one I bought, and it's the same as the first one we had.
When did we tear that room, that partition out in the
kitchen?
kitchen there?
Well, I can't remember the date. We had lived here, I would say probably 3 years, 2 or 3 years. I remember the day that your dad tore it out. He had stayed home from work because he had a cold, so he got busy and tore the partition out of the between there, because we had talked about doing it, and so that day he had too bad a cold he couldn't go to work, but he sure worked tearing that partition out.
Let's see, I had a couple other things I was going to ask you about now. What were they? What were some of the neighbors that we had around here that you remember real well?
Well,
That were here when we first moved here.
all right, across the street over here where Jim and Betty Miller live, in this white house, Mr. and Mrs. Brown lived. You remember them.
Yeah.
I'm sure you do.
Yeah.
They lived there when we moved in here, and Mr. Brown was an attorney.
Oh, that's what he did.
Yeah,
I thought he was
yeah.
in government or something. I
No,
couldn't
he
remember
was-
what he did.
He was an attorney, and had an office downtown, and she worked too, but what did she do? I just can't remember.
Was she a librarian? at
I never did get very well acquainted with her until in the later years when we first moved here. But she worked, because I know she went downtown with him every day when he went. She worked at the university. That's what she did.
That's right.
She worked at the university
And it was as a registrar?
as a
or
registrar
something?
in the registrar's office down there. Yes. And then people by the name of Bothwell. Do you remember them? Or was that before you could remember?
Well, I don't
Lived
really
across the
remember.
street here where Potters used to live.
Yeah.
When we first moved here, some people by the name of Bothwells lived over across the street west here. Jensen's, you remember them, because you used to play with the Jensen boys.
They lived up here, though.
They lived up here, yes. Well, across on 51st Street up
51st.
here. Mm-hmm.
What were Browns like? Do you remember much about what they were
Yes,
like?
they were a very nice couple. He had been married before, and he had 5 children, and she had 3 children. When they got married, they had but their children were, most of them grown, I think. I can't ever remember any children going and coming from there. I can remember some young folks, but not any really children. But they were just a real nice couple. They really were. And
They used to have a lot of things in their yard too.
yes,
They grew a lot of things.
yes. They had this yard where the duplex is over here belonged to them, you know. And they had a lot of trees and shrubbery back in there, and they always kept it up and had a nice yard. Well, then Harringtons lived up on the corner. Do you remember the Harringtons?
Sure.
They lived up there on the corner of 51st and Madison.
Mm-hmm.
They lived up there. I've always thought that was a shame. I'll bet you that house was nice.
It was real nice.
I never was in there. Were you inside the
Sure,
house?
I used to wash windows for her and
I
help
thought-
her with
yeah,
cleaning.
Yeah, I thought that you had been in there. And I just always think it's too bad that these nice houses get taken down. I always felt that was probably a nice house inside.
What about some of the other people around?
Well, Barclays lived across the street, the catty corner over here in this gray house. Do you remember them?
Yeah, he was something at Wesleyan.
Yes, he was a professor at Wesleyan, and they had 2 boys, but their children were older too. They were young men when we moved here, I think. And they lived over there, and I just cannot think of the name of the people that lived on the corner here.
Weatherhogs.
Weatherhogs, that's it. I have tried to think of that name lately. Was thinking about them the other day. Now, they lived there on the corner, in that little house on the corner.
Now, he worked down at Green's.
Yes,
And he was
yeah.
crippled?
He was kind of crippled,
Yeah.
yes. He was a little bit crippled, yeah.
Now, did they have some relatives or something live with them different times? It
yes.
seemed like I remember some other people.
Yes,
over there.
they did have. I don't remember who they were, but they did have other people. And then Mrs. Lear, you remember her, lived
Yeah.
in this White House north here. She and
her sister.
Her sister, yeah. Hmm.
And she always had a nice yard.
Oh,
and
she had a
everything.
beautiful yard, yes. She had tulips all around the south side of the house here, and beautiful roses in the back, and she just worked in that yard, and she had a beautiful yard.
Now, was she always retired when they lived there? I can't remember.
Uh-huh, yeah,
Ever
she was.
working.
Yes, she was. I remember the morning that I went over there after we had moved here, we needed some rods to put up in the closets upstairs. And of course we didn't know exactly where the lot line was or who belonged what back here. But out here back of our barn, there were a bunch of iron rods. And Dad had told me to find out if they belonged to us or if they belonged to her, or who they belonged to, because we wanted some rods to put up in the closets to hang the clothes on. So I can remember going over to her back door and knocking on the door and telling her who I was and that we needed those rods, and if they were ours, we wanted to use them. And she was so nice. And she always thought so much of you. And she reminded me so many times of the time that I was out here hanging up clothes when we had our clothesline out here, and you were out there, and she came over and she was talking. She asked you what you did, and you said to her, "I just work all the time." She thought that was so nice. She was a real nice person.
Yeah, I used to mow her yard then.
Yes.
A lot
Yeah, you did.
later on.
Yeah.
What about some of the other people then that lived over here?
Well, Taylors lived across the
Yeah.
street. And there was another family that lived there before Taylors did, though, when we first moved here.
I can't remember who they were.
And I can't think who they were either right at the moment. And then Hilliards lived up here on the corner.
Yeah.
You remember Harold Hilliard or Danny Hilliard?
Yes, yeah.
They lived up there on the corner of 51st and Adams.
And then Kuntz's lived down there.
Yes.
They were there all the time. too,
Yeah.
weren't they?
Well, no, there was another family in there before Kuntz moved there. Their name were Parley, P-A-R-L-I, and they moved, and then Kuntz bought that place. And then Grabowski's lived down there on the corner
That's right.
of
yeah.
51st and Adams on the west side. Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
Who else lived along there? There were some other people.
There was a Mrs. Johnson that lived down there. And I never did get very well acquainted with her. She went to our church over here. She and her husband, I can still remember them walking back and forth to church. But I never really got acquainted with her very much. And then there was what was the name of the lady? She had a grandson, I think, lived down there. Lived along on that
Willoughby.
west, huh?
Scotty Willoughby.
Willoughby, yes.
I was trying to think
Yes.
of that too. When
Yes.
you said it, I thought of it.
They lived. She lived down in there, on that side, and then there was Legs lived over here. Do you remember the Legs? They lived next door to where Potters
Yeah.
lived, and yeah.
Now, what did they have a grandfather or somebody living with them? They had.
Yes.
It seemed like there were several people. They rented rooms. Maybe
Yes,
some of the
I
time?
think they rented rooms, and then they had some relative living with them too. I don't remember just who it was, but.
Well, this neighborhood had kind of a mixture of people then. Some
Yes.
Teachers and professional
Yes.
people, and then like potters.
That's
that
right.
Were laborers
Yes.
and things. It's kind of.
Yeah. It's just
bunch.
kind of a mixture of, yes. Friedstom's lived up here, you know, you
Yeah.
remember them. They lived up here next to,
They moved in later.
yes, they did. Yes, they didn't live here when we moved.
Yeah.
Gardners lived in there before
Yeah.
Friedstrom's did.
And they moved in. They didn't always live there either.
No,
Somebody else.
no,
lived
when
there.
we first moved here, Gardners lived over on Adams.
Yeah.
And I don't remember who lived there before Gardners did.
And the apartments were always here, weren't they? When we moved here, the apartments were built.
Over here,
Yeah.
yes, yes, those apartments have been here.
And did Biggs always own those? Do you remember?
Yes, yes, they did, as far as I know.
And did Biggs always live behind us too? Then I can't remember. I know they lived there.
Yes, I think they did. I think they lived there when we moved here.
Yeah.
And they owned the apartments. Barnes took care of the apartments,
Yeah.
you know, when Biggs,
What were the name of the two sisters that lived over in the yellow house that's gone now, where the sixplex is, between Matson's and Biggs, on 52nd.
between Matson's and,
Biggs' house. There was another house in there, remember? That yellow house?
that's right. They took that out, didn't
Mhm.
they?
And there were two
Oh, that's right.
sisters that lived in there, I
Yes.
think, or
But I can't remember their
I
names.
can't either.
I remember who you're talking about, but I can't. When you first started talk, I thought maybe you meant the Hutchins. Do you remember the Hutchins sisters that lived over here?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And she was a school teacher. Ruth
Yeah.
was a school teacher. One of them.
Then we rented rooms here for different times, didn't
Yes, yes, we rented rooms to some students from Westland that went to Westland.
we? How did that work out? I remember they used to be kind of noisy sometimes.
Oh yes, I never liked to have people upstairs. No.
And then we had some foreign kids lived here, didn't we?
Well, we had two colored
Yeah, I
boys that
remember
lived
that.
there, and one of them was real nice. One of them was Gerald Henderson, and he I don't know whether he's still in Lincoln or not, but for a long time I'd see his name in the paper every once in a while. He was quite active, and was really a good boy. But the other fella, colored boy, was supposed to be going to Wesleyan, I think, on a football scholarship. And he wouldn't go up to practice, and Wesleyan would call and want him to come, and he wouldn't talk to him, and he wouldn't answer the phone, and that other guy was a pill. But Gerald Henderson was a nice fellow.
Didn't we have some Filipinos or something, or some other nationality? It seemed like we had that lived here.
Well, we had a boy from India that lived
India.
here.
Well,
what
I
was-
thought before that we had
Oh,
somebody from some Filipino lived here.
Well, if he did, I've forgotten about him. they, no, what was that? What was that minister's name? Harold,
Harold
Edgar.
Edgar.
Harold Edgar lived here, and George Edgar lived here for a while, too.
Harold was the ornery one.
Yes, Harold was the naughty guy. He was the ornery one. George was a good guy. They lived here. Both of them lived here for a while.
And then how'd that work? They have keys, or they just came and went?
They just came and went. During those times, we didn't have to worry about keeping our house locked.
Yeah.
We never used to think about locking our house. We'd go away and never lock the house.
Yeah.
Now I lock the house even when I'm here.
Still a lot of people in Crete that don't lock their houses.
Is that right?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
A
dear.
lot of people do.
Oh, I just, yes, I think of that so often. We just never used to lock our doors.
Then when we first moved here, this was gravel out on the south side.
Oh,
too,
yes,
wasn't it?
yes. Cleveland Street was not paved when we moved here.
It was completely dirt, wasn't it? Didn't have gravel.
No,
did it?
I think it had gravel.
Did it?
Yes, it was not a dirt street. It had gravel on
But
it.
then after it was paved, wasn't this block just west of us? It was still dirt
That's right.
for a
That's
long
right.
time
For a
because
long
they didn't
time.
sign on the
That's
paving.
right. They didn't sign, and it was just sitting there. Dirt, yeah.
Do you remember when they paved that? I can't remember.
This one up here, you mean, or ours?
Well, ours. When,
I think about 1950.
then when did they pave that other one? Do you remember?
About 3 years afterwards. 2 or 3 years afterwards. Yeah, I think it was in 1950 they put that paving in.
Can you think of any other interesting things that happened when I was growing up around here?
Oh, I can think of
Excitement.
one that I think I should put in here.
I know what you're going to say.
What?
Time I was gone and
Oh, my
got
goodness.
such a licking.
June 6th, now what was that? Was it VE Day?
Yeah, I think it was.
I think it
There
was.
some celebration. of some
Yes, yes. I had gone to Lincoln to shop. Grandma Spencer lived here with us. And Grandma and she knew I was going to be gone. And you had gone up to play with the Jensen boys, I guess. And she didn't know where you were. I came home from town. She hadn't seen you. You hadn't been home for lunch. She didn't know where you were. And so I immediately began looking for you. And I looked up and down these streets. And I went over to the people's houses trying to find you. And I couldn't find hide nor hair of you. And finally you came home. You and the Jensen boys had been out north of town here, all up and down Salt Creek, investigating whatever there was to find. And you were tired and you were dirty and I was disgusted and I gave you a bath and put you to bed.
I think you gave me a spanking too.
Yes, I probably did. Because I was really upset. You were only 6 years old. Oh, dear. Well, let's see. What else happened around here while you grew up? Well, let's see. What else happened around here while you grew up? I can remember the times that you used to take stuff from our garden and go up and down the streets to sell it.
Did I
You
do
just,
that?
oh yes,
know.
you like to do that, yes.
Did I sell anything?
Well, yes, you did. You know, heads of cabbage and whatever we had that was for sale or saleable. Yeah, you used to do that. Mrs. Barkley across the street used to get a big kick out of you coming over there with things. And she asked me once, we had the two, you and Joanne here, when you were little kids. And I can remember Mrs. Barkley saying to me once, "Don't your children ever cry?" She says, "I never hear anybody cry over there." Well, let's see, what else? I can remember how you set up the badminton set out here on the north side of the house. And you and the Taylor boys used to play badminton. Do you remember that? And then you used to have hurdles out there. You'd fix hurdles and you'd jump hurdles. And
what about this? Dad built a swing set for us out in back.
That's right,
Too. When was
yes.
that? Do you remember?
oh, you were about 6 or 7 or 8 years old. He put some 2x4s together and put a thing across the top, and you had a swing out there for a long time. You had a big sand pile over here on the south side.
Yeah.
And you remember that big sand pile that we had over there under the trees?
Yeah, and then we had a bag swing out here where
Yes.
Laverne broke his arm. Remember that?
Oh, no, did he break his arm there? I'd
Don't you
forgotten
remember
about
we'd
that.
ride our bikes under that and somebody'd grab a hold of the bag and
Yeah.
he fell off and broke his arm one time?
Oh, my land, I didn't remember that.
Yeah, I'm sure it was Laverne Potter.
Well, I can remember Dorothy Matson telling me, she and I are working, she works over here for Senior Diners when I work over there, and she was telling me not long ago about how she looked the whole neighborhood over for Susie, her Susie, just called and looked, and she said, I was just about ready to call the police, and here she found her down here playing in our sand pile. No, I had forgotten about Laverne's breaking his arm over here. Well, let's see.
What about during the war? I remember we used to have blackouts and Dad used to be a block
Oh, yeah.
something or another. I can't remember
Yes.
what they called it.
Yes. He'd go around the block to
Check, see if the
Check-
lights were out or
yes,
something.
yes, we'd have to, they did that as a precaution, so if, I guess it was to be so that we could, if we were be attacked, we could blacken the whole town so
Yeah.
people, so they wouldn't be able to spot where the town was. And then they had these people that would go around the block to be sure the lights were all out.
Do you remember what they called?
I
What was
had
he called?
forgotten about that.
Block something or another, I thought. Block
Uh,
supervisor or...
Something like that, yeah. I can't
You remember
remember.
how he got into that job?
Oh, probably got asked to do it, and he said he would. I
Yeah.
suppose they were looking for people to do it for every block in the town. I think that's the way it was. And he'd go around with his flashlight, checking to be sure. Well, we had rationing, of course, during the war. You remember that, or maybe you
Barely,
don't.
yeah.
Sugar rationing, and but it never affected us very much. We always had enough stamps for what we needed. Of course, Grandma Spencer lived with us then,
Yeah.
and Bob was here a lot of the time, so we had his stamps, and we never ran out of stuff.
Where did you shop for groceries when you moved here to Lincoln, or to this house? I remember we used to have Haller's grocery store, but
Yeah.
is that where you bought most of your groceries?
No.
Or where did we shop?
No, we bought a lot over at Howard's because they ran a nice little store over there. It was just a small community store, but it was a nice little store. We shopped over here at Holmes Grocery. There was a Holmes grocery store here, and then there was a grocery store. What was the name of that store? It's where the Goodwill is out here now. Do you remember? There was a grocery store in there.
Was that IGA or was...
And the only thing I can remember is the, what was the name of that store?
I remember the store, but I can't remember the name of it either.
I can't remember the name of it, but,
Then there was Safeway down there that kept getting hit by lightning.
yeah, that's right. Yes, we used to shop at Safeway quite a little too.
But that wasn't there all the time.
No,
was
no, I can remember when they built that store. No, that wasn't there. We shopped at Holmes an awful lot of the time. And then there was another store down on South 27th Street, Ideal Grocery, where we used to like to shop quite a bit. When we moved out, we used to shop there all the time when we lived over on A Street.
it? Now that's in the same location it is now.
That's right. It was right there in that store. And that was a good place to shop. But it was a little far from here. We used to go down there once in a while. But mostly we shopped out here in this area.
What about, I can remember some places like at 56th and O, there used to be little fruit stands there, Arrigo's fruit stand.
48th and O, or 48th and Holdridge is where Arrigo's were.
Yeah. Let's see, 48th and Holdridge.
And we shopped there an awful lot.
48th and Holdridge.
Yeah, there's a
Oh, on the southwest?
southwest
Was that
corner.
Arrigo's?
Yeah.
Well, it seems like there used to be one up at 56th
There
and
was,
O, too.
well, there was one at 33rd.
Yeah. That was a long time ago. I can
Yes.
barely remember those places. Then there was a market downtown that was kind of black and white. It was down around 20th and O somewhere.
Yeah, Capital
Market or
Capital Market, I
something
believe.
like that
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, we used to shop there once in a while. Yeah.
But most of the time you shopped out
Yeah,
here at
most of the
home.
time we shopped out here. Yeah. And we did shop over here at Haller's a lot of the time because they had a nice little store, and they were a real good store until the brother-in-law, Bob Fertig, had to go to the service. And after Bob left, Ray just couldn't handle it by himself. And it wasn't too good after that.
So the war didn't affect you much, the Second World War?
No, not really, no. We didn't suffer any hardship too much from it. The thing I hated the most about the Second World War was that Kenneth was in the war, you know. He was in the service. And he was right in the front lines I can remember that summer that he was in the front lines, and we were all so worried about him. We just didn't know because...
Well, no. I didn't think he was over there very long.
Oh, well, he wasn't. He got shot. He was only in the front lines for 3 days, I think.
Yeah.
And he got shot, and of course then they took him right back to the behind the lines, and that was the end of his service then.
And then Bob was in, too.
Yes. But I don't think Bob was right in where the fighting was. I don't remember that he was. Now, he might say he was, but I don't remember that he was.
And Victor was in, too.
Yeah, Victor was over in Africa, you know.
Yeah.
He was an airplane mechanic. That's what he did.
Oh, he did?
Yeah, he was
I remember he was saying once that he used to go up when they'd parachute jump, and he'd pick up the cords after they jumped or something like that.
Oh, was that right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Totally.
he was an airplane mechanic.
Well,
But all in all, the war didn't really affect us too much.
I can't think too much more right now, so maybe we'll stop.
Okay.
We've been going for